being told? Who you gonna call? Mythbusters! Welcome to the ADHD myth-busting season. This is the post-family barbecue debrief that you've always wanted, where you either arm yourself with some serious comebacks or finally say what you wish you'd said. Let's get into it. I ain't afraid of a myth. Let's use some science, not an online article written by an idiot. I ain't afraid of no ghost. Come get me.
You are at a family barbecue. Someone's burnt the first round of sausages because they've wandered off to get a beer. Someone else was supposed to bring salad, but they actually bought more steak. So at this point, it's basically a meat-only barbecue. Everyone's sitting around a plastic table passing food, and your child isn't sitting at the table with everyone else. They're walking around the yard eating a sausage. And Uncle Ned notices. Why aren't they eating at the kids' table? And of course, right at that moment, your perfect sister's kids are sitting there beautifully. Napkins, straight backs, wiping their mouths, and just to top it off, her kids are actually younger than yours. And it feels like everyone's looking at you, like wondering, maybe your parenting is the issue, as if you haven't thought to try to get your child to sit down when they eat. But you know that's not a battle that you are going to win today. And right now, you're actually enjoying something rare, a glass of wine, talking to a cousin that you genuinely like. So you take a breath. You try to explain it calmly to Uncle Ned. You've had this conversation before. They've got ADHD, Uncle Ned. So sitting down at a big barbecue lunch is actually really hard for them. And Uncle Ned nods. There's a little bit of a pause and someone asks again why there are 30 steaks for 15 people and still no salad. That is a great question. But then the sentence comes out. Uncle Ned says, "We didn't have this ADHD thing when we had kids. They just sat at the table like they were told." And suddenly you're sitting there thinking, hang on a second, did he say ADHD isn't a real thing? Or is he saying this is just me getting the parenting wrong? But by the time you've processed what was said, the conversation has moved on. The conversation changes to cleaning out Grandpa's house. Why has he kept every single newspaper since 1963? And whose turn is it to be power of attorney? But you are stuck on that sentence. We didn't have this ADHD thing when we had kids. But you're not mentioning ADHD for fun. You're explaining it because your child isn't able to sit at the table right now to have lunch, but other kids are eating. And your child is now under the table, or they're kind of across the yard, or they're asking the 10th question in 30 seconds. And you're trying to help them not fail at something as simple as a family barbecue. You're trying to help them survive this afternoon without telling them off 50 times in front of everybody and without them disrupting everyone else's meal whilst you try to force them to sit at the lunch table. So you let them walk around as long as they're eating some lunch. So when a well-meaning family member says, "We didn't have this ADHD thing when we had kids," it hits differently because you know what it took just to say the word ADHD out loud at a family barbecue. You waited months for that assessment. You paid thousands of dollars. You sat in the appointments. You spent nights reading about ADHD while everyone else was asleep. You've gone through the hell of trialing medications, watching your child, hoping this one works, wondering if you made the right decision. All of that just so they can get through the moments like this at the table right now. You've worked with the school so they can sit in a classroom all week. So then on a Saturday, when they want to walk around while they eat, forcing them to sit still until everyone finishes their lunch doesn't feel like the hill you want to die on today. So when Uncle Ned casually says, "We didn't have this ADHD thing when we had kids," it can feel like the message underneath is maybe you're overthinking it. Maybe you're making it bigger than it needs to be. Maybe the problem isn't ADHD. Maybe the problem is you. And that's when my stomach drops. I don't know about you. And the thing is, if you mention it to anybody, they would probably say that Uncle Ned didn't mean anything by it. He was just standing there with the barbecue tongs in one hand and a beer in the other, saying what other people say. But once you start to hear that sentence, you realize how often it shows up. Families do something very predictable when behavior looks familiar. Psychologists like to call it familiarity bias. But at a barbecue, it sounds like, "He was just like me as a kid. Your uncle was just the same. That's just our family." And suddenly the story becomes, see, it's normal, isn't it? But familiar doesn't mean easy, and it doesn't mean it isn't real. Maybe back then the hyperactive kids just rode around their bikes all day. They were outside till dark. And they only came back when someone yelled out dinner time. If you were inattentive or dyslexic, maybe you got moved to the class where people stopped expecting much. The daydreamer. one that teachers didn't bother pushing too hard. Families adjusted, expectations shifted, and people just quietly worked around the behaviour. No one called it ADHD, but that doesn't mean it wasn't there. Meanwhile, your child has now walked past a table for the 4th time, still holding the sausage, but then letting the dog have a bite of the sausage and then eating it again. Ew. But then there's another thing going on at the same time. Psychologists call it narrative protection. But at a family barbecue, it pretty much looks like this. If ADHD explains something today, then suddenly maybe the past is different. Maybe the kid who couldn't sit still might have actually been struggling. Maybe the teenager who was labelled lazy might have actually been really overwhelmed. Maybe the adult who kept burning out in jobs might not have been irresponsible. Maybe they needed help or support. And that's an uncomfortable truth. So instead, the easiest story becomes, oh, we didn't have that back then. But here's one more thing that families often miss. They see the behaviour, they see the energy, the big emotions, the distractibility, but they don't necessarily see the load. And I like to call that load blindness, where family members don't see the meetings with the school, the regulation work that you're doing all day, the planning, the explaining, the constant adjusting. From the outside, it might look like a kid who won't sit still at lunch. But from the inside, maybe it's a parent trying to help their child navigate a brain in moments like this, where a barbecue lunchtime table makes life a lot harder than it needs to be on a Saturday. And right now, all you're trying to do is to get through a family barbecue without turning the whole afternoon into a battle about sitting in a chair, publicly with your whole family watching. So meanwhile, while everyone is just having lunch, you could be watching your child across the yard, checking, are they getting too loud? Are they starting to dysregulate? Are they about to grab the dog by the face again? Maybe a well-meaning family member has put some lollies out and you are calculating how many your child has had and whether that will tip them over the edge. You might be deciding whether to intervene or let go, scanning the table to see who's starting to judge. Maybe you're quietly holding the whole situation together so no one else has to deal with it. Because ADHD parenting isn't just the behaviour that people see, it's the constant regulation work happening behind the scenes. But nobody at the barbecue can necessarily see that. They might just be seeing a child walking around a yard eating a sausage. From the outside, it might look like you should be parenting more, like maybe you're letting it go. Maybe you need more boundaries. However, they may not see that you're parenting hard all the time. You've already spent the whole week helping your child sit still at school, helping them regulate in the classrooms, helping them manage expectations that were never designed for their brains. So at a family barbecue on a Saturday, maybe they need to move while they eat. Sometimes the most regulated decision is not forcing the battle. And maybe, Uncle Ned, back when you were the parent, maybe you just let your child ride their bike around the streets all day. And if they didn't want to learn at school, they just moved to a class where less was expected of them. Maybe they burnt their energy off. Maybe they came back when someone yelled out dinner and they sat down and ate it because they were so hungry. There was no snacks. They were exhausted. They've been moving for hours. But society is different now. Kids are expected to sit, perform, focus, be supervised. We are parenting a lot more than back when Uncle Ned was. And suddenly the cost of a brain that needs to move shows up in moments like this table right now. And this is the part that people don't get. When someone says, we didn't have this ADHD thing back when we had kids, it sounds like a comment about ADHD. But when you're on the receiving end, it lands like a comment about you. Because at this barbecue, no one is seeing the whole picture. They are seeing a child walking around a yard eating a sausage. They are not seeing the work it took to get your child to go through a full week of school so you could barely hold down your job, to arrive at a Saturday barbecue where apparently the final test of parenting is, can they sit in a plastic chair and eat a sausage like everyone else? And this is what is so brutal about this myth. It takes a moment that is already hard and quietly turns it into some kind of verdict, not just on your child, but on you and your parenting. Like as if this wasn't a problem 30 years ago, then maybe you created it. Maybe you're naming too much. Maybe you're noticing too much. Maybe you're the reason that this is now a thing. But this is such a cruel distortion if you think about it, because what's actually happening is not overparenting. It's not fragility. It's not modern parents inventing problems. It's a parent doing highly skilled, high stakes, invisible regulation work in real time, but then having other people in your family confuse that work with indulgence. And that's the reframe. The problem is not that parents today are making too much of things. The problem is that previous generations often never got to name the cost at all. So the child that needed to move all day was just called feral. The child who drifted around was called lazy. The teenager who couldn't keep up was pushed aside. And families built stories around all of this because they had to. That's just how families were. But these aren't neutral descriptions. Sometimes these are stories that people made up to make what felt unbearable feel normal. But now, today, you are the one at the barbecue breaking the pattern, and that's tough. By refusing to pretend the cost isn't real. Because the cost of this myth is not just that it makes you want to roll your eyes and wish you never had to go to another family barbecue. Yes, there's that cost, but also the cost is delay. Delay in understanding, in support, delay in compassion, delay in children's needs actually being met properly, delay in mothers trusting themselves. Because the second that ADHD gets framed as some kind of modern invention, parents stop getting asked the right questions around support. Instead, the question becomes, are you sure? Are you overthinking it? Are you making it worse by labeling them? And that shift is really devastating because now you are no longer using your energy to support your child. What you're actually using your energy for is to defend your reality in a family or a friend setting to prove that it's not a parenting issue, and children absorb that cost. They grow up feeling like their experience has to be justified before it can be supported, like they need enough evidence of the struggle before they're allowed help, like they have to wait until they're drowning before anyone will admit the water was too deep and they were too young to swim. And us, the mothers, we pay that cost in guilt, in second guessing, in constant emotional labor, in trying to look calm at a barbecue while your whole body is humming because you know how quickly that one comment can turn into shame. This is where responsibility needs to move, because the difference between now and 30 years ago is not that ADHD suddenly appeared. The difference is that the cost is visible. We name it. That's what's changed. We understand neurodevelopment better now. We know more about regulation, executive function, sensory load, classroom demands, chronic stress. We know that some children can hold it together all week at school and then fall apart in the most ordinary moments, because ordinary moments are not ordinary to a taxed nervous system. We know that sitting at a family table is not morally neutral when your brain is built for movement. We know that just making them sit down at the table is not actually a parenting strategy. Often it's just a public performance for other adults, yet that's what we're expected to do. So Uncle Ned's generation hid a lot of the cost because systems were different. And honestly, a lot of kids were just written off as no good, expected less from, or punished until they look compliant enough for other people to feel comfortable. But is that evidence that ADHD wasn't there? Or is that evidence that the suffering was absorbed differently, usually by the child? And now in this generation, you are refusing to make your child absorb it quietly just to keep other adults comfortable that everyone is being compliant at a family barbecue. That's not overreacting and it's not bad parenting. That's actually society's progress. So when someone says, we didn't have this when we were kids, you actually have a decision to make about whether you are going to shrink back into the old shame or stay rooted in what you know. You do not need to make your child sit there miserably to prove that you can control them. So someone else can feel better about how things were done in 1989. Your decision is so much simpler than that. You decide whether you are going to keep treating visible behavior as the whole story or whether you are going to honor the cost underneath. And that's your decision. And if you stay with the truth, maybe your answer is not defensive. Maybe it's steady. Maybe saying 1 or 2 lines is enough to neutrally say, this is not about my parenting or my child's character, and put the comment, we didn't have ADHD when we had kids, back where it belongs, which is the mismatch between a child's nervous system and the expectations from society wrapped around it. This is not your child failing at lunch or that you're failing at parenting. It's that this moment at the family barbecue lunch costs them and you a lot more than people see. And your job is not to deny the cost. Your job is to name it. So the next time it happens, and it probably will, because there's always an Uncle Ned somewhere, standing near a barbecue saying something with complete confidence and absolutely no insight, and your child is halfway across the yard, and your sister's children are sitting there like they've been raised by a parenting catalogue, and you feel that old shame trying to crawl back up into your throat, I want you to remember this. You are not imagining the work. You are not creating the problem by naming it. You are not weak because you see the cost. You are the one finally refusing to make your child pay for everyone else's comfort And this is what's happening. You are the one in the family system saying, we are not doing this by silence anymore. We are not calling overwhelm defiance. We are not calling regulation difficulty bad character. We are not pretending that because something was unnamed in the past, it was harmless or didn't exist. And yes, that can make people uncomfortable because the truth likes to do that, especially in families, especially when the truth changes a story that people have told themselves for decades. The harm is pretending the cost isn't. So no, ADHD didn't just suddenly appear. And your child is not the first person in your family to struggle with this. They may just be the first person who doesn't have to do it unnamed. And that matters much more than Uncle Ned's opinion, more than table manners, and more than the performance of one tidy family barbecue. Because once the cost has language, support becomes possible. And once support becomes possible, the whole story can change. And that's the shift. That's progress. And this is why it matters so much. Thank you so much. If you've loved this episode, please send a listener question in, join the Facebook group, or share it with a friend. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next week.